Hi, I'm Technomancer, creator of Crossroads, and this is episode 7 of the tutorial series on the mod. I have spent so long making these videos that there's actually been an update since the previous section. So we're now on Crossroads 2.5.2, up from 2.5.1. So the remainder of these tutorial videos will be on that version. But don't worry, it won't change too much. Now, while the previous videos so far have covered mostly the early and mid-game content and heat and rotary stuff, we're now going to move on to beams. Beams I usually think of as mid-game to late mid-game content, and beams are very powerful, very flexible, and also very different from the rest of the mod in the aesthetic and in the way you interact with them, but not different in the design philosophy of these are simple, the mechanics are fairly simple, the individual blocks are fairly simple, but you use them in complex ways to build complex machines. So even though it looks all bright and colorful and white and shiny, and this looks a lot more industrial, this is still the same mod, and it's just the visuals changed in a way. Now, beams is, I'm going to try and keep it in one video, all in one video. We'll see if I can pull that off. So we're going to need our omnimeter, which to measure things, and we're going to want our wrench, as always. And to get started, I'm just going to show a few things with beams. And what I should actually do to get started is wipe my advancements. Because I want to be able to show this all over again, which means I need to wipe my advancements. What is it? I don't even remember what it's called. Let's just do everything. There we go. Removed all my advancements. You know, the things that replaced achievements, advancements. Yep. All right. So we're going to also want this block here, which is a color chart. Now, if you've never done beams before, you're definitely going to want one of these. It's a little machine, it's a little block that just gives us a little information and helps us keep track of all the numbers involved in beams. Now, if we open this up, I call it a color chart, but it's looking pretty monochrome right now. That's because we haven't discovered any colors yet. So, if I, for example, make a very simple beam, and I'll explain what I'm doing in a moment, but let me just do this. Let's say what's a good example? Let's use this. If I put some sulfur in here, we see we've got a red laser beam coming out, and it's doing some stuff, but we're going to get to what it's doing later. If I look at this with the omnimeter, we've just had some very important information displayed, and we've had a pop-up in the top right. First, we're going to look at this. We're seeing the beam that this machine output when I used the omnimeter on it. So we're seeing the color, RGB color. You know that thing that's used for colors, like the RGB color, red, green, blue? Beams use that. So the same color codes used by everything else in the universe are used by beams, and this is a bright red beam, so it's pure red. And then we're seeing energy, potential, stability, and void. Now, beams are very much the way beams do various effects in the world, and the effects that they do very much depends on their color. Okay, so red beams start fires, green beams grow plants, purple beams can spawn mobs, and so on. So the color is very important. But the beams themselves aren't made of colors, they're made of energy, potential, stability, and void. Now, energy is red. So pure energy, like the beam I just showed, which we saw was 16 energy and 0 of everything else, was pure red. If I do this, this is going to make, if we watch, a pure green beam, which is, I know, pure potential, because potential is the green color. And again, we've just seen a pop-up in the top right when I scan that. More on that in a moment. The next thing is stability, which is blue. Void is black, and we're going to get to that in a bit. Okay, so we've seen various colors, and every time I scanned this thing with an omnimeter, there was a pop-up in the top right, and it told me I got an advancement, and I got a new chapter in the book. And this is why I wiped my advancements. Every color has a name associated with it. So pure blue is stability. So when I scanned this, it said stability. This is blue, so it must be a stability beam. And I got a pop-up in the top right saying, I scanned something with stability in it for the first time. I've now discovered stability. Now, I've done that with energy, potential, and stability, just showing that off. Now let's look at our color chart. Suddenly it's starting to be filled in. So here's our blue region, stability, here's our red region, energy, and here's our green region of potential. And I can mouse over this region to see color codes at different points, so RGB, and the name of the alignment there. See? And there's also a search bar where I can search all the things I've locked. Now, let's do another one. So you can see that just because it doesn't have to be pure green to be potential, it can be sort of yellowish green, it can be sort of mint green. There's a whole bunch of greenish colors that get called potential, and this color chart's letting us see all of them. Okay, now let's do a different color combination, and I happen to know that if I put redstone in here, it's very loud. It made a sort of yellowish green color. Now when I click on that, we can see quite a few things. This is charge. Yellowish beams are charge. And we saw that the color of this beam has an RGB value of yellowish green. And it's a mix of energy, potential, and potential. So energy is red, potential is green. When you mix those two, you get yellowish. And there's slightly more potential than aka green than there is energy, aka red, so it's a slightly greenish yellow. And now we've filled in charge. And just to see exactly which part of this color band is charge, I can type that in, and we can see that these colors are all considered charge. Quite a big region. Now, every time I discover an alignment, it gets added in the book. See, there's lots and lots of locked entries here that I haven't scanned yet. But I've discovered charge, so I can see the alignment charge. And it tells me exactly what charge does and reminds me here what the color is, yellow. So any yellowish beam where the color is in this region will be charge. So there's different alignments, and the alignment determines what the beam does, and the color of the beam determines the alignment. Okay, so let's do a couple more alignments. You do not need to memorize these at all. You find them by looking at empty spaces in the color chart that are still gray. You try and make that color, and then you scan it with the omnimeter, and it'll be in the book, and you'll have all the information in the book. So I can say, there's clearly something I haven't discovered yet that's purple, because there's purples not filled in yet. Well, I happen to know that if I put ender pearls in this block, it's going to make purple. And I'll explain this in a moment, but I just happen to know that. So let's do this and see what we get. Okay, we got purple, and purple is called rift, and we filled that in. And now I can read in the book and find what rift does. Okay? Now I should probably explain what this block is. So this is the resonance extractor. The resonance extractor is the main way of producing beams. In fact, as far as this video is concerned, it's the only way of producing beams. There's another way if you go down into technomancy, but that's much later on. So this thing uses various items as fuel, and there's JEI support, and produces beams. So the type of item you use changes the type of beam it makes. So for example, if I scroll to a random place here, if I give this thing snowballs, it's going to make beams that have 8 stability. And 0 energy, 0 potential, 0 void. They're not listed, so we know there's 0 of them. And it lasts for 1 cycle. Now, in beams, 1 cycle is a 1/5 of a second, aka 4 game ticks, aka 2 redstone ticks. So 1 cycle is 2 redstone ticks is a 1/5 of a second. And that's in the book, obviously. So what that means is if I put snowballs in here, it says the snowball is going to last 1 cycle, aka a fifth of a second. That means it's going to consume 5 snowballs a second. If we use a different fuel, which lasts a bit longer, like for example, if we put a honey block in here, we're going to get 12 potential out, and the fuel's going to last for 16 cycles. That's a slightly over 3 seconds. And we can see that 1 honey block is lasting quite a while. You can see the burn time bar there. Oop. Okay. And different fuels are making different outputs. So some of them last longer than others. Some of them make multiple things mixed together, like blaze powder makes energy and potential instead of just energy instead of just potential like the honey did. Coal makes energy and potential mixed together, and so on. There's a ton of fuels you can use. I made Rift with ender pearls, which do energy plus stability. Red plus blue makes purple. Honestly, I really hope you aren't colorblind, because this part of the mod is not colorblind friendly. Sorry in advance. Okay, now we've got them coming out of this extractor. Let's do a few demos of things that beams can do. So the first thing that beams can do is, let me get a reflector here, just so that I can open the JEI integration more easily. We're not going to use this block yet, but you'll see in a moment. First of all, beams can be used to craft blocks in the world. So if I look through the JEI integration, it says if I shoot a charge beam with a power of at least 8 at stone, cobble, sandstone, one of any of these blocks, it'll make it into this crystallized redstone. Now, what's the power of a beam? The power is just the total number of units in it. Like this had 12 potential, so it's power 12. If I were to do the ender pearl again, which has 16 energy and 16 potential, 16 plus 16 is 32, that's a power 32 beam. That's pretty simple. Finding the power. So just total number of units in it. Total things in it. So power 8 charge, at least. Powers greater than 8 are also fine. Good grief, this is loud. I should not have, but let me just turn down my sound. As you can see, charge does more than make that crystallized redstone stuff. Okay, so if I put some redstone in here, it's making charge beams of, that is still loud, I'm going to turn down my volume more, of power 42. Just turn it all the way off. So power 42 beams. Hey, quick math, 42 is more than 8. This is more than enough. So if we shoot this beam at some cobblestone, even if we just shoot one of them, it's made it into crystallized redstone. Now, we used 1 redstone dust to do that. If I break this now, it just dropped 2. So, and that cost us 1 redstone dust and a cobblestone, and we got 2 redstone out. Hey, we can automate redstone this way pretty easily. This crystallized redstone, by the way, is basically like glowstone blocks. It drops 1 to 4 dust and emits a redstone signal like a redstone block does. Similarly, very similarly, if we shoot a light beam at stone, and this has a very low minimum power, this recipe. The redstone thing had minimum power 8, this has minimum power 1, which means any light beam can do this. It'll turn into glowstone. Hey, glowstone dust makes light. It makes a white beam, 444 specifically, which is pure white, because all the numbers are the same. And hey, we've just filled in light. So I just used 1 glowstone dust to make multiple glowstone dust. We can automate this. And I think in my spotlight of Crossroads, different video, I automated glowstone dust, which I did, not glowstone dust, redstone dust here. This is a redstone dust machine, and it's fairly simple. It's increasing the amount of redstone dust, and I could have set up a chest to store the excess in. Where was I? I was over here. But there's lots of different things we can make with these beams. So to give you an overview of some of the highlights, you can make prismarine stuff and sea lanterns and stuff. You can make clay. You can make gilded blackstone, which is a source of gold using blackstone. But it's not a very good one. This is kind of weak. You can turn normal skeleton skulls into wither skeleton skulls. You can make ice and snow. You can... any other... Oh, you can make this stuff called pure quartz blocks out of sand. And we're going to get to pure quartz in a moment. And so on. So there's quite a lot of useful conversions here. Pure quartz blocks, by the way, is just the block form of pure quartz. Pure quartz is a crafting material used in beam stuff a lot. It's made of quartz, nether quartz, and salt, and it's just an ingredient used in pretty much all the recipes. So that's a way to automate that very commonly used beam ingredient using beams. Now, typically, you don't just want beams to come straight out of a reflector. You want to maybe take them somewhere else so you don't need to point the reflector straight at it every time. And I just called it a reflector. This is called a resonance extractor. It is not a reflector. A reflector is the next block, the beam reflector. Hey, what this does is not at all tricky to understand. It reflects the beam. Okay, it lets us move it around. Now, every single time a beam goes through something, like it goes through this reflector, it adds a delay of 1 cycle. So just like redstone repeaters adds a 1 redstone tick delay, a reflector adds a 1 cycle delay, and a cycle is 2 redstone ticks. Just a thing to note. And beams can only travel up to 16 blocks from the source. So with this, we can move our beams around a lot more easily, and that's a good thing. I also should probably mention, before I forget, you can disable the resonance extractor with a redstone signal if you just want it to not run. Just so you know. So, I haven't talked yet about how every time I've been doing this, I've been summoning some lightning, which has been very loud. And the reason for that is not only can beams be used to craft blocks in the world, every alignment also has a special effect specific to that alignment. So charge beams, if the power is above 16, summon a lightning bolt. That may be useful, it might not be useful, depends on what you're doing. Also, if you put a charge beam into a machine that uses forge energy or electricity, it just makes electricity in the machine. So if I, for example, get, what's a machine you've seen that uses electricity? Our Tesla coil here. So no electricity in it. I shoot a charge beam at it, some electricity in it. Okay, so you can actually use beams to make power if you want. Energy beams start fires and also add heat to things. So if I were to put like a heat cable here and just run it along, and so this is a biome temperature, and I'm just gonna put some fuel in this machine that I know will make an energy beam. I just melted the cable, I made so much heat in it. Let me get rid of this lava. So a lot of beams have quite useful effects. Light will create these little light clusters, which are basically little torches that aren't that don't get in the way. So it sort of just spawns these where it hits. They're little light sources. You can walk through them. And so on and so forth. Some of these effects are more useful than others. Stability is unusual in that it does nothing. That's weird. Most beams do things. It doesn't, but you need... So that's a thing. Potential acts as bone meal, so if you hit a plant, it'll grow it. Also, it has an AoE heal effect, so any entities, including players, within a range of where the beam hits, will be healed. Now, a lot of the effectiveness of all these effects, the intensity of these effects depends on the beam power. So, with potential, higher power beams, aka bigger green beams, will heal for more, they'll have a bigger healing range, and so on. And there's quite a lot of these. In fact, you can see there's a whole bunch of entries in the book that are still locked because I haven't discovered them yet. So we've now learned that there's a lot of beams that can do useful stuff, and we've seen how to make them, and we can move them around with the reflectors. But we're not done yet. Now we're going to introduce our next beam alignment here. This is quite a useful one. This is expansion. And what it does is it'll actually make items that are on the ground nearby get placed in the world. I'm just dropping these. And the moment the beam stops, this stops happening. Now you might be thinking, why on earth is the ability to create this mess useful? And the reason is this is a way to automatically place blocks. This is the first thing in Crossroads that lets you automatically place blocks in the world. So if I had a dropper, and I wanted a machine that places, I don't know, dirt here. And I'm just going to load this thing up with salt again so that it'll run again. Hey, now we've got a block placing machine. Fancy that. That could be quite useful. And the range of that effect is based on beam power, so if you don't want a massive AoE effect over your whole base, okay, the range isn't that big, but you just want it on one specific block space, you can use a very low power beam to have a very small range. But there's quite a lot of different beams that we haven't even looked at yet, which have useful effects. Let me just do quickly the other ones. Rift can spawn mobs in the world, and it can do it quite fast depending on the power. So that's useful for mob farms. I'll just tell you what the grayed out ones are. Fusion is used for a lot of the more valuable crafting things where you do crafting in world for things like making pure quartz and prismarine. Equilibrium is quite interesting. It's a bit of a weird one. It suppresses explosions. So if something would have exploded near an equilibrium beam, like you set off TNT, the explosion does nothing. So you can, and the range on that can get quite big. So you can use an equilibrium beam to make your base creeper proof, for example, or to make the wither unable to hurt you. Just food for thought. Over here we have Enchantment, which can enchant items without using levels, but has a chance to destroy the item. But you can get very, very powerful enchantments very quickly. Time is this very small orange region right here. Time does tick acceleration, but not very much tick acceleration. You can only get up to, I think, off the top of my head, I think it's double speed, so you can make a furnace cook twice as fast, and you can only do it, and it only does the one block it hits. So it's not a very strong effect at all. It's very limited and very expensive to try to do it to lots of things at once, but it is an option, and time beams certainly play a factor if you go the technomancy route later on. Okay, so there's a lot of beams, they do useful stuff, and we can move them around. But how do we manipulate them? Like, if we want a fusion beam, or do we have to find an item that makes fusion when we put it in the extractor? No. You can find an item that makes fusion when you put it in the extractor, but you can just make fusion out of blue, green, and red, right? It's colors. You can mix colors to get the sort of teal color you need for fusion. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, adding colors together is really easy. You just shoot them into the same reflector at the same time. So if I do this, I don't even know what this is going to make. I'm going to be honest, I've not tested this. We've mixed our yellowish green and our blue to make this sort of mint green. Now, this actually ends up being a potential beam. Again, I didn't actually test what this would make. Let's try something else. Let's put some coal in here. Oops, that's a pure beam, because my salt ran out. There's smarter ways of doing this, obviously, but I'm just trying to demo it. This ends up being a light beam now, apparently, because that's close enough to white. I would not have expected that, to be honest. And so on. But yeah, you can mix colors this way. So it's really easy to add beams together. Is that light again? Really? Okay, right, and so on. You can mix them. You can get different alignments by mixing together colors. So if we wanted to get, very obvious example, purple, aka Riff, we mixed blue and green, right? And in this case, this is 16 energy, aka 16 reds, and 16 stability, 16 blues, which means they're equal parts, and we're going to get pure purple. If there had been more red than blue, we would have gotten sort of reddish purple. Now, let's move on. How do we split beams is the obvious next question, because if we could only add beams together, that wouldn't be super useful. Well, we're going to use something called a lens frame to try and do a little more control over our beams. So this can do quite a lot of things. So what you do is you get a gem and you put it in there. So for example, I'm going to put in a ruby. And now, let me space this out so you can see. Beam blocks work even if they're right next to each other like this. I always just space them out so you can see the beams, by the way. Now if we put something in, like, let's say coal. Coal makes a mix of energy and potential, right? It makes yellowish. Now it's all red after going through the filter. What's going on here? Well, the lens frame filters out everything that doesn't match the gem. So, with ruby, only energy can get through. So, the beam coming from the coal had 24 energy and 18 potential, and coming out is only the 24 energy. The green, any blue that would have been in there, if there had been any, just gets lost. It gets destroyed. So we can purify our colors. Similarly, we can use if we wanted to get specifically the green in that, we can use an emerald. And that will only get the green. See? And of course, if we put in a diamond, that only gets the blue. Now, there is no blue in the beam that comes from coal, so nothing comes out. But if I put in something that does have some blue, like the teal color that we get from salt, we do get some blue out. Ta-da! There are other things you can do with these frames. If I attach a comparator or a circuit reader to it, it will tell me, it'll get the power of the beam currently going through it, even if there's no gem in it, so we can just have no gem to let everything through without any delay. So we're 16 power beam, we're measuring redstone strength 16, or trust me, we are. There are other things you can put in this. This is a particularly interesting thing. If I put pure quartz in here, it doesn't do anything to the beam. The beams go through and don't get changed at all. But if a light beam goes through it, hey, that crystal turned yellow. It's turned into glowing quartz. That's a different item. That's used in a bunch of recipes. So, you know, that's the thing. You can also just craft glowing quartz directly with glowstone dust, but considering you can just make a loop of light beams to do this, let me make a bunch of it. Now we've got a loop of light, and now we can just make as much light quartz as we want without spending any glowstone dust, because this doesn't consume the beam at all. And this could, of course, be automated, so that's just a little thing. Lens frames are also used to make void. Now I said we were going to get to void. Now, void usually gets used a lot later than other beam stuff because you need void crystals to get it. And these only come from the end. You don't need void to do most of the stuff in beams. So you can do stuff in beams without other than void and then add in void stuff when you get it. So if we put a void crystal in here, let's space this out for visibility, absolutely anything that goes through that will get turned into this black beam. This is void, the fourth thing. So energy, potential, stability, and void. We now have the complete set. And this doesn't filter things, this turns it into void. So 16 power went in, 16 power worth of void came out. So what does void do other than look ominous? Well, it flat out deletes blocks without even dropping the item. But it does something much more useful, which is we can mix it with other stuff. If you add even 1 point of void to any other alignment, it will change the effect. Instead of doing the normal effect, it'll do the opposite version. So if I go to the chart for example, the energy section, the book says, well, energy beams add heat to cables. But void energy, aka cold, will remove heat from heat machines and cables. If there's even a single point of void mixed in, it will, instead of doing the normal effect, it does the void effect, which is completely different. So by even having a single point of void mixed in, instead of saying energy, it's cold. Cold can be used to remove heat from cables. So now if I place this down, we're going to see the temperature is already dropped to basically absolute zero. So this is a very effective way of cooling. Very, very effective way of cooling. So just by getting access to void, we've doubled the number of alignments effectively available to us because every single alignment has a void version. By the way, stability, which did nothing, void stability explodes. It just makes explosions. Decide how you feel about that on your own. As you can see, they're quite large explosions. Quite large explosions. The size of the explosions goes up with power. Every beam effect is capped at power 64. Power 65 beams and above, the effects don't get any stronger. So there is a cap, by the way. So yeah, might be worth, once you get access to void, going through all the alignments in the book again and saying, wait, what can I do with these now? Loads of useful extra stuff. But okay, there's still more ways to manipulate beams. You can merge them, you can filter them, you can measure them, and you can move them around, but of course, there needs to be a way to actually split them. Well, we have the Crystalline Prism. Now the prism takes input in the top. Now these are quite expensive, so you want to try and design to use as few of these as possible, or if possible, none of these. And what it does is it splits the beams into the 4 primary colors. 4 colors because black is one of them. Okay, so if I put, let's say, some salt in here, which we know makes blue-green. Ooh, whoops, I didn't think about that. It's getting fed back in. The 4 different sides, there's a red output, a black, a blue, and a green. It split it. So this is a lossless way to split your beams so that you can use all the colors in them. Right? When we use this as a filter to say only get the green, we lost all the blue. But now the blue still comes out, it's just out a different side. And there's an input on the top and bottom of this block. But no, wait, there's more. There's also ways to split beams, so based on power. So there's a whole bunch of them. And they're pretty similar to each other, all of them, so we're going to do them very fast. Simplest one of them is the beam Redirector, which just lets you control which way a beam goes with a redstone signal. So if I put something in here, let's say U, if I give this thing a redstone signal, it comes out the front. No signal comes out the back. Very, very, very simple machine. It's purely on-off. There are versions of this that aren't purely on-off. Those are the more complicated ones. Redirectors, by the way, very cheap. The machines I'm going to show you, less cheap. So, for example, the Siphon uses diamonds, rubies, and emeralds to craft. Not cheap, but still cheaper than the Prism was. I don't normally cover the recipes, but I just want to point out that if you try to use some of the more advanced tools, it gets more expensive, so you're encouraged to try and use the simpler pieces in complex ways whenever possible, instead of going to the fancy blocks. Now the Siphon works with circuit inputs, so I'm just going to get a circuit wrench. Okay, and it just takes an input, and let's say I set this thing to 4. So this thing is receiving a redstone signal strength and a circuit signal strength of 4. Wonder what's going to happen. Wonder what's going to happen when I give this thing a wee bit of a signal, eh? Let's find out. A wee bit of a beam. Hey, beams came out both sides. And as we can see when we clicked on it with the Omni... Oh, that's a Siphon. I thought that was a Reflector. Hey, the stuff that came out the front is power 4, and everything else went out the back. So the Siphon siphons off the power, a certain amount of the beams out the front and sends the rest out the back. It is a lossless machine. It doesn't use any beam power at all. It just splits it. So now 9 came out the front, whoops, and the rest came out the back because it got signal strength 9. Now you might be wondering, what happens if I give it a mixed color, like I put in coal, where there's both blue and green? How does it split it? Well, it tries its best to keep the color the same. These all have to be integers, so it's not perfect. So if I get larger numbers, we're going to see it's going to sort of stay closer. So if we put in a reddish-yellow beam, we're going to see a reddish-yellow beam out the front and a reddish-yellow beam out the back. You can see the colors are very slightly different because you can't keep the exact same ratio with 20 points, because this is what, like a 4:3 ratio, and that doesn't quite divide evenly, but it's doing its best. It's doing its best, all right? Now the other version of this is the beam splitter, which again takes a circuit input, and instead of we're actually going to use a lever on this. Well, yeah, we're going to use a circuit input on this. And instead of splitting off a certain constant number, it splits off a portion. So, while the Siphon, if we gave it signal 9, took 9 power out the front, with this one, if we give it power 9, it'll split out 9/15ths of the total beam to the front. Now, 9/15ths is a bit weird, so we're not going to do that. We're going to do 7.5. 7.5 is exactly half of 15. And this thing can work with decimals because it's a circuit. It works with circuit input. So this thing's going to do a 50-50 split now. Hey, it did a 50-50 split. Maybe I want a 2-to-1 split. So 1/3 comes out one side and 2/3 come out the other. Hey, it did that. So that's the Siphon and splitter. That is pretty much all the machines that can work with beams. You can pretty much always find a very advanced solution to things and a very simple solution to things, and sometimes there's multiple ways to do everything, and sometimes it's more expensive than others. There's a couple other things I just want to quickly cover. One of them is the stabilizer. Stabilizer, fairly simple. Let's say if we use one redstone dust, if we put like a single redstone dust in this machine, it makes a single pulse of a beam. It's very short, but it was quite high powered. It didn't even stay on my screen for very long. See, it's quite a big beam, and it was quite a high power. Now, let's say we don't need a single pulse that's quite high power. What we want is, let's say we want a long continuous beam, so it lasts for a long time and it can be low power. Well, here's the stabilizer, which which stores up any beams you shoot into it and slowly shoots them out over time, so it buffers them. And you can control the rated outputs with shift right clicking with a wrench. So now it's outputting power 16 total until it runs out. So we fuel this thing up with a few pulses, and now it's just draining the contents. Okay. There's beam permeable blocks. Beams cannot go through walls, but they can go through certain things. So generally, if it looks like a beam should be able to pass through it, it will be able to. It's a very visually intuitive system. So it can pass by a torch, it can go through liquids. If I put a gear under here, the beam can quite clearly pass over that, and it can. So it's very much determined by the shape of things. Interestingly enough, beams can't go through glass. Glass might be transparent, but beams can't go through it. That's intentional. Beams can't travel through glass. That's on purpose. Now, if you do want a solid block they can pass through, there's a couple blocks that do that. Permeable quartz, permeable glass. These are very cheap. They're just solid blocks that beams can pass through. Not tile entities or anything. They're safe for building everything you want. And the very, very last beam machine of this video is, of course, the Crystal Master Axis. Hey, beams interact with rotary stuff. Amazing, isn't it? Just when you thought you'd escape rotary because I didn't use a single gear this video. No, it's back again to haunt you. Hopefully you actually like doing stuff with gears. I know I certainly do. So remember, every gear system needed to use a master axis in it somewhere to work. Instead of a master axis, we can use a crystalline master axis. Again, we only need one per system, and adding extras won't do anything. So swap out your normal one for a crystalline one. This lets beams interact with gears. So what we do is we shoot the beam into the master axis, the crystal master axis here. And it does stuff. Now, for example, if we use an energy beam, you can see the beams are starting to spin. Because that will just slowly add energy to the system over time. Now you can see time remaining when I right-click this with my Omnimeter. The beams get stored in the block, and they last a certain amount of time based on beam power. So I just shot quite a lot of redstone in there, so it's going to last a couple minutes. See, it's ticking down, and when it runs out, it'll act like a normal master axis again. A master axis can only do one beam effect at a time, and different alignments have different effects. So, energy added energy to the system over time. Stability does something rather different. Stability actually makes it so there's no power loss at all. Now, shooting at a different beam has overridden our stability, our energy. We can only do one at a time, can't do energy at the same time we're doing a stability effect. Stability overwrites. So what's stability do? Hey, there's no power loss anymore. If I hold right-click on this, energy's speed staying perfectly the same. This gets rid of passive energy loss. Machines still use energy, but there's no frictional energy loss. That's useful. Not all alignments do stuff in this machine. The ones that do say so in their entry in the book. So charge does something similar to energy, but slightly different. Equilibrium does stuff in this machine. Equilibrium, you're going to want to read the entry for that. It acts as a way to sort of buffer out energy changes. And it's kind of an unusual one. So that's just the thing I wanted to cover. So, I just think that covers beams. There's a huge number of beam sources. You definitely are going to want to have an automatic source of energy, potential, and stability. They don't all need to be from the same item. They can be from as many items as you want. But you just need to have a source of all three of the basic colors. Because you're going to use beams a lot. They can do an enormous amount of things. They can place blocks. They can break blocks. They can summon mobs. They can grow plants. They can heal stuff. They can kill stuff. They can manufacture prismarine or clay or whatever you want, basically, within reason. So beams are definitely worth using and looking into. The next video we're going to do is going to be on the paths. There are 2 paths in this mod, alchemy and technomancy, and that's going to be the topic of the next video. Probably going to actually have multiple videos on that topic. So, see you next time.